Welcome back to another video presentation for the Easy As Accounting software. What I want to point out in this video presentation is the what do I need icon on the main menu. If I jump here and I click this, what this does is this. It's a forecasting facility to estimate what your daily requirements of income are you need minimum per day coming in to cover your expenses. If I click this here now, I'm going to leave this here just the way it is. I'm just going to click perform calculations. I want to let you see this briefly. It says so far I need $27 per day coming in to cover my average overheads. That's what it says my average overheads are. What does that mean? It means that for this particular client, it's looked at today's date in the computer. It's looked at all the entries of the computer up until the last date. And it's done an assessment between the first and last expense entries. We jump out of here and have a look. It's not worried about income, it's looking at expenses. It looks at the first and last expense entries. This is the last expense entries on the 11th of September. It looks at the first date and the last date. It adds them all together. And it says, hey, based upon the number of days in between, etc., 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 we've done a calculation that we estimate this business costing you a total of $27.22 per day. That's pretty obvious, but there's some amounts here that probably we don't want to include on that. So, what we want to look at first is this. Step 1. How many days? How many days do you normally work in your business? If you work a 6-day work week, well then you can spread that cost over 6 days. So now if I click this, and click perform calculations, it now comes back and says I need to make $13.61 per day before I start making profit. So it stores the last 5 calculations. So you can see there, it's now stored this figure. Right, so that's pretty obvious, but you can actually have a weekly. You might want to see a daily amount. You want to see, well, that doesn't mean anything to me. How much do I need to make per week on average to cover my expenses? It says I need to make $81 a week. If that was my business, I'd be cheering, but I don't think any business has that low figure. We're all up normally into a couple of hundreds minimum. So let's say that's what it comes back and says. Bases on these figures, but you go out throughout the month and we have a look at our expenses and we're going to turn around and say, well, hang on a minute, I've got a material category here, and let's assume that this was a builder. Let's not assume it's Mr. Lawn Mowing Man. Let's assume it's a builder. It doesn't really matter what he is, I guess. But let's go down the list for a second. I know there's a big figure here. Okay, tools and equipment. You might turn around and say, well, hang on a minute. Tools and equipment are one-off items. They shouldn't be included on the expenses. They're not daily overheads. This is for overheads, folks. This is for recurring money. It knows you need this. If I've purchased a tool and equipment, that's a one-off payment, one-off purchase. I'm probably not going to buy that again. So it's probably not something I need to keep check off. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But what's more relevant is if that was definitely materials, you might say, well, hang on a minute, that materials was for a specific job. Specific task. Definitely, I don't want to include materials because I got paid for them when I did the job. So you can go back here to this what ifing calculator and you can say to it, what items here do you not want to include on the calculation? I don't ever want it to include materials, so I'm going to click it off. No, I don't want it to include materials in the calculation. So when we exit out of the screen, we come back in down the track, it's going to remember that. It will remember the fact that we turned it off. So you don't have to keep turning this off, right? It remembers the fact that we changed that to weekly and that we turn this off. So now if I click perform calculations, you'll see it's totally different. Now it says per week. We only need 47. See that? Whereas before it was 81. That's it. That's the whole guts of the what if calculator. There's help screens here, and I really think you should read this here and look at this scenario, different scenarios of how it was used. This is a marvelous tool. This I use every day in my businesses. Okay, I've got several businesses. I use this at least every week. I'm checking this because I'm entering in my expenses each week as I go along. I used to do it monthly, but I now do it weekly because I use this tool quite often, and I get to see each week how much money I'm making. How much I'm needing to cover my expenses. And if my income isn't meeting that per day, something seriously is wrong. I know there's a few industries out there and it's tough times at the moment for some people, and the overheads are going up and the income isn't meeting it. And you want to know, you don't want to know 6 months afterwards when you're putting your tax in that you've gone broke. You don't want to know when you've got no money in the bank. You want to know week to week, day to day, what your average overheads required, what you need to make coming in to cover your average overheads day to day, week to week. Because if you don't know this, you don't know where you are. You need this sort of information up front. Yes, you can still get your totals at the end of the year, at the end of the month, whatever you want to do. I rather this than have a graph. You know, I could have purchased another accounting program and had a graph that told me the flow and where we are. Big deal. It tells you after the fact. It doesn't tell me anything else. This here is the closest we've got to real time. It's telling me now, yes, it is using the evidence that we've already put in there. The entries, it goes off the information we've already put in the system. Yes, it does use that, but it's very, very smart, and it's the best way of doing it. I like this. I think the more you get to use it, the more you understand it, the more you play with it. There's a help icon for each area. Read it for each of these steps. It's 1, 2, 3 main steps. So this here, you can select your dates and you select this, because you can alter this and switch these dates around. It's very quick, very fast, and you can dummy it around and muck around and see what would happen, and you get a good idea what's going on. I don't think there's anything else I need to tell you. Definitely read the help. Definitely read this here. Give you a great idea of what happened with these poor guys here. See what I've done with mine as well, okay? Not necessarily be the whole business. Maybe you might have one area of your business that you want to check. See, this is what I've done. I've got a couple of businesses, and I have my expenses set up in such a way that I added new categories, and I've called it like 1, I've put a 1 in front of it, or a 2. I've gone 1 materials, 2 materials. So business number 1's materials, business number 2's materials, and to me, in my business, the materials to me are overheads. They aren't like a carpenter's materials or for a job. They're part of my business. Now, I go back in here and I just turn off particular ones I don't want to see. So I don't want to see anything pertaining to that side of my business. I turn off that particular part. So what it's good for is if you're doing specific jobs for specific one, you might be contracting to a couple of people in your business, and you want to see that contract number 2 that you're doing for Joe Blow down the road. You might be thinking, I don't think this is very profitable. It's costing me so much more in fuel, costing me so much more running around. Am I making any money? So if you keep the expenses a little bit separated, which a lot of us do anyway, because we want to see where we're going, we can come back into here and we can click off the ones that we don't want to see and quickly press this, and it tells us what we should be making every day to cover our overheads. This doesn't have anything to do with the income itself, but at least it tells us that I need minimum so far, I need $47 per week here to cover my overheads. Okay, and if you're not making $47 per week, then you're in trouble anyway, I guess.